Welcome. You're listening to Sports Econ 101, the show where we discuss sports topics from a business perspective. I'm your host, Edward Brown, along with my co-host, Russell Jackman and Mike McDowd. At each commercial break, we're going to ask a sports trivia question. And since we are in baseball season after basketball ended, we are going to be talking baseball, which is kind of fun because in our next segment, Mike's going to introduce a special guest. This is definitely one for the ages because it has some historical connotation to it, to him, and I don't think we've ever had anybody in his industry before, so this will be actually kind of fun. One thing I wanted to bring up that they forgot to bring up a couple of weeks ago. So Kiki Hernandez was wearing a mic during you know that sometimes when they're playing baseball, sometimes they'll mic an outfielder, usually an outfielder, and then he'll be talking during the game. Well, he made an error like right with the balls being hit to him as he was talking on the air. And now he says it had nothing to do with being distracted, but I'm thinking, you know what, they want to kind of rethink these things. Don't you think people get distracted? Can you imagine talking to some guys on the air and then suddenly a ball gets hit to you? What do you think?
Well, listen, I get distracted doing this show. I got a ton of things going on with me right now. So come on. It is what it is. It's just it's part of the business.
Hey, listen, when I first started, I had, as someone, an engineer and a this and a this. Now it's like, because we're doing this on Zoom, I got to do everything. I got to look at the clock. I got to look at you guys. I got to know what I'm talking about here. I'm not the best multitasker, but I guess after you've been doing it for 10 years, you kind of get a little bit of the hang of it. All right. So when we come back, Mike's going to introduce Jerry Cohen, owner of Ebbets Field Flannels. not because I think, didn't they get rid of Ebbets Field? I think my dad used to watch that. The Brooklyn Dodgers used to play there.
1960.
There you go. All right. Stay with us. You're listening to Sports Econ 101. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, along with Mike McDowd, Russell Jackman, and our guest corrected me that he is not the owner, but he's the founder of Ebbets Field Flannels, Jerry Cohen. Mike, go ahead and sort of elaborate on that intro, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually excited as could be to introduce our next guest because, I'm a fan of this guy. His name is Jerry Cohen. He is the founder of Ebbets Fields Flannels. Now, for anybody who loves sports, you may have heard of this company. I hope you've heard of them. Jerry is an imagination guy, a creator. Before I get to that, something a little interesting about the sports apparel is a massive business. That's not what we're going to talk about. But in 2013 alone, $213 billion were generated in revenue in 2023. That's a lot of money. But that's not why our guest is on our show. Jerry Cohen, the founder of Ebbets Field Flannels, obviously a baseball historian, created this unique brand of throwback uniforms from the Negro Leagues, the Pacific Coast Leagues, the U.S. tour of Japan when Babe Ruth and the Lou Gehrig toured Japan in the 1920s. His stuff is epic, for lack of a better word. We're going to say hello to Jerry. Jerry, I know originally you wanted to be a rock and roll star, and you said, I'm going to give it up, and I'm going to create something even cooler. What's that?
I'm still working on it.
What was the name of your band, or what's the name of your band?
I was in a lot of bands you never would have heard of, so yeah, it's okay.
and originally you're from Brooklyn, New York, correct?
I was born in Brooklyn.
So was I.
Migrated out to
I was a big Brooklyn Dodgers fan, so yeah.
Yeah, well, my dad was the Brooklyn Dodgers fan, so I was the Mets fan growing up. Yeah. The Dodgers actually, I was born the year the Dodgers left, so okay. And funny, the name Ebbets Field Flannels partly reflects that. It was like a little bit of a tip of the hat to my dad, who told me all these great stories about Jackie Robinson and Ebbets Field. which really started my interest in the history of baseball and in later on in the uniforms.
And since you're from Brooklyn, do you have any Brooklyn Bridegrooms and Brooklyn Robins uniforms?
Well, that's the same team. It was really the Dodgers. One thing people don't really realize is nicknames, even in Major League Baseball, were not official for a long time. So teams would be called multiple things depending on the newspaper headline writers or what the fans. So the Dodgers operated under Superbas, Bridegrooms, Trolley Dodgers. Dodgers finally kind of settled in the 30s and 40s.
And the Robins came because of Robinson, as I remember.
Right. That's what I mean. The Wilbur Robinson, the manager.
Wilbur,
yeah. So that's how some of these teams got their names. They would just, okay, we'll call them after the manager. We'll call them after, something that happened on the field or whatever.
Yeah, the Cleveland Naps for Nap La Joie or Nap La Joy. Yeah.
Yep, that's right. Yep. Exactly.
And who was the Cleveland Spiders, though? Who was that named after?
That's the same team. They were just called the Spiders for a couple of years.
Spiders. Wow. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Jerry. Jerry Cohen, our very special guest, the founder of Ebbets Field Flannel, started in 1988. Jerry, talk. This is radio. I'm wearing a San Francisco Seals Stadium crew jacket, my favorite jacket, and below is the Hawaiian Islanders T-shirt. I'm not getting paid to do this, but Jerry, talk a little about the origins of the. Let's talk baseball first of all. The origins of the baseball uniform. Why were they created? Talk a little about the materials used in these baseball uniforms, because we'll get to that. But let's talk about the history of the baseball uniform. Why?
Well, I think going back to the late 1800s, when professionalism entered baseball, there had to be, like any other sport, it took quite a while for the uniform to be standardized. So at first, I think the closest thing was cricket. So they would wear straw hats, for example, and shirts with ties. And you can still see that. In fact, they've republished all the Spalding guides from that period of time. And if you go to the back, Spalding was very clever. The first half of the book was all the statistics and all that. But the back of the book was used to sell their equipment and their uniforms. And so you could see how for example, the baseball cap evolved over the years until it finally sort of standardized in maybe the late 1920s. And, in terms of fabrics, there's a lot of misconceptions about wool. We talked about it the other day, but wool in those days was the only fabric that had the strength and durability for athletic competition. There were no synthetic fabrics yet. Cotton was not a strong enough fabric. So wool, even bathing suits were made of wool. In the Olympics, if you go back and see track uniforms, they were made of wool. But you could do a lot with wool. You could make a very lightweight wool, and it had some strength. Now, in baseball uniforms, even though they used wool until 1970, 71, the wool evolved over time. And after World War II, when the synthetics started to be used, the wool that they were using at the end of that era was very, very light in comparison to before World War II. The Babe Ruth era, if you look at those uniforms, they're thick as a blanket almost, really heavy.
And were they as itchy as we all would think?
Well, I mean, wool has got a bad rap. I think people make some assumptions about it. First of all, in terms of the itchiness factor, you wore a cotton blend shirt underneath it. And we actually sell it. We call it the fungo shirt, but it was a 2-layer shirt that had cotton on the inside. So it was quite comfortable, and it breathed. And that's the other advantage of wool as opposed to the later polyesters or the initial polyesters. Yeah. Wool was a breathable fabric, where polyester, you're encased in it. So
and the funny thing is, they didn't come up with night games till I think the 30s, right?
Oh yeah, night games started. Well, night games started earlier in the Negro leagues and in like barnstorming games, because to sell tickets, which is what it was all about, they had to come up with a way to get people to the games when they were not at work, obviously.
Yeah.
So it was during the Depression when teams were really suffering financially. And initially, they would bring lights in on the back of pickup trucks and have portable lighting systems. So the Kansas City Monarchs used to do that, for example. They'd come to a
Yeah,
town.
just thinking that like during the summertime in the heat, to wear that wool, if you again thinking it's a little hot versus at nighttime
Sure,
when it's cooler.
that's another
Yeah.
factor. Is that night games obviously were cooler than playing 100 plus games during the day in the summer. So in terms of the lighting, yeah, that became I think Crosley Field in Cincinnati in MLB was the first city to adopt permanent lights. But it was
And before we go to our break, what was the last one to get
Wrigley
lights?
Field, right?
Wrigley Field, yes. Of course this man knows his trivia. Okay, guys, we're going to cut to our first commercial trivia question here. We're talking baseball. And again, just a reminder, Jerry, if you know the answer, don't say anything yet when we come back from break, all right? Who are the only two players to win? Now, this is going back to the. I'll say we're going back before 1985. Okay, because I don't know if it's changed since then. But who are the only two players to win A, League MVP, B, World Series MVP, and C, All-Star Game MVP? Right? Who are the only two players to have won all three of those? All right. Stay with us. You're listening to Sports Econ 101. When we come back, we're going to be still continuing on with Jerry Cohen, the founder of Ebbets Field Flannels. Very fun topic here. All right. Don't touch that dial. We are going to be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. I'm Edward Brown, along with Mike McDowd, Russell Jackman, our special guest, Jerry Cohen, founder of Ebbets Field Flannels. All right, first trivia question. Who are the only two baseball players to win A, League MVP, B, World Series MVP, and 3, All-Star Game MVP? Anyone?
Babe Ruth.
No? Well, no, they didn't. Well, no, I was going to say they didn't have the All-Star game until 39, I think. But no, so the two players, I'd say brothers from another mother. How's that?
Oh, brothers from another mother.
Yeah. That's what Vernon Glenn used to use that all the time with me. Brooks and Frank Robinson.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. Those guys, they won all those. Okay. Mike, you want to reintroduce our guest?
Yeah, happy to do so. Our very special guest today, Jerry Cohen, the founder of Ebbets Field Flannels, started the company back in 1988. And Jerry, so happy to have you. I'm a fan of yours. I've got so many of your shirts. I'm putting, I know this is radio, but it's a Sacramento Solons T-shirt. I love the thing. It's beautiful. Your stuff. So many great questions I want to ask you, but keeping it personal, I know that I told you that I bought a Babe Ruth U.S. Tour of Japan jersey. I believe it's from the 1920s. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry. And
1934.
Okay, I got to tell you that uniform I cannot wear in the summertime. You can either address that or not. But fabulous hand stitched work. Where did you get this idea to create this impeccable stuff? I mean, you cannot find this stuff anywhere. Your stuff is the best of the best.
Well, going back to 88, really as far back as 87, when I got the idea, I was sort of like falling in love again with baseball history, doing a lot of reading, I was with a group of musicians who played softball. And so I started to wear some of the vintage caps to the games that we would play. We played mostly sandlot style, games, pickup games. And that led me to the fact that even as a kid, I always loved jerseys and uniform graphics and would study the baseball cards. And this goes back to like the 60s when I was a kid. Yeah. We had a black and white TV in our house back then, believe it or not. And the only way you could see color was to buy the packs of baseball cards. So I would study those. So I had a little bit of a photographic memory and about those. And so I started to get into the uniform history and bought some old shirts, on the used market, which was not easy, had some patterns made. And the idea at the time was just to make them for myself and my friends. And then people started to give me orders, for specific teams. And then I found myself with the question of, do I want an expensive hobby, or maybe this is a business? So that's really how it happened. Lots of things had to happen. The fabric for those jerseys was no longer made. So I had to buy, there was a warehouse that had some old stock. And when that was out, I was basically out of business. So I had to convince one of the old woolen mills in New England to make it again.
Wow.
And so I'm compressing maybe 2 or 3 years into just a couple of minutes here, but lots of things had to happen. And then the other major thing I think that we decided to do was some alternate history. I mean, nobody in 88, 89 knew about the Negro Leagues. Just a few baseball historians, obviously whatever players were still living. And the other thing that fascinated me living in Seattle was the old Pacific Coast League and how many people talked about that. Because the Coast League was almost a de facto third major league before the Dodgers and Giants moved west.
Yeah, isn't that where Joe DiMaggio played?
Yeah, all three DiMaggio brothers started out there with the San Francisco Seals. Ted Williams with the old San Diego Padres. And the Coast League played like 200 games a year back then. And because MLB was only 10 teams all east of the Mississippi River, except for the St. Louis clubs, and there was no TV for national MLB games, the Coast League had its own culture and style. And so that was really a fascinating story to me. So I think the two things we brought forward were the history of the Negro Leagues and the history of the Coast League initially.
Can I ask you one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, because I was thinking about this before, and it's a little bit off topic from what you were talking about. I'm sorry. The hats, they had this very small brim. Why was that? I mean, you think that for, like the one you're wearing right now is a normal cap to keep the sun out of your eyes.
Well, like I was saying earlier, the standardization of the cap took many decades. So one style of cap from, I'd say, the 1890s, and it didn't really go out until the 1930s, was a short brim. We call it a short visor style cap.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why that would be. Why would anyone want to wear that when
Well, it was just, you got to think of it in terms of the time. It wasn't like someone said, okay, you can have this type of cap, with the longer visor or the short one. That's what the manufacturers made. And then eventually after time, they decided to make it a longer visor. And, like everything else, the cap evolved. It didn't appear like a modern cap all at once in 1900. So if you look at pictures even from the Babe Ruth era, that Yankee cap from the 20s has that short visor.
It does, but you know what though? I think about, remember how the Pirates in the 70s, they brought back the old.
They brought back that we call the now I'm forgetting actually the style of that, but that style of cap was based on it was the 100th anniversary, so it was the bicentennial, 200th anniversary. So in 76, they decided to bring back that sort of style cap from 1876.
And it seemed like that. I mean, that one had a longer brim.
Yeah, it had a longer brim.
Yeah. So anyway, I'm sorry for getting off topic. I was thinking about that. I got to ask him the question about that one.
Hey, Jerry, there really is a nostalgic love affair with uniforms. If you look, for example, our show is based on the West Coast. You take the San Francisco Seals, the Oakland Oaks, the San Diego Padres, the Portland Beavers, the Seattle Rainiers.
Right.
Talk a little. If you're a sports fan, you really love sports, like I know you do, Jerry, Edward, Russell, myself. There's an attraction to the history of these uniforms, the colors, just the pageantry of the whole thing. Why is there such kind of a love affair for the uniform? Is it because you're part of the tribe, the identity of a team?
It's a good question. One way to answer that is, I think the what went into creating those uniforms and those graphics at those times were such a more simple and, in my opinion, elegant way of thinking. They didn't hire a graphic arts company for $300,000 to give them a rebranding. And then after 2 years, they do another rebranding, and everybody has to throw out the crap they bought from the previous one. You know, there's, in my opinion, a cynicism to today's uniforms. It's like, okay, now we're going to have an alternate. Everybody gets an alternate. Everybody gets a City Connect. Everybody gets, and it's great. I understand why they do it. It's good business. But I think there's a disposability to a lot of the uniforms today in terms of memory. Why? I ask myself, look at all the uniforms today that are overblown. Too many colors. You know, too much going on. Stuff on the side of the hat. Stuff on the back of the hat.
Yeah.
So let me guess, you're not a fan of the San Diego.
None of it. But then look at the one that stood the test of time. Look at the Yankee NY. One color. They've never had to change it.
Actually, Detroit Tigers haven't changed theirs either.
Detroit, well, that D, if you really look at the history of that D, it's evolved, and there's like 20 different versions of it. But yeah, it's basically an Old English one color D. Yeah. And the Yankee hat, the Yankee NY, has evolved slightly, but it's the same logo they were using in 1915. And so
on the other hand, the Giants, have the terrible city uniforms, but they win all the time in them. Yeah. So they look terrible, but the fans love them because it means they're probably going to get a win.
Yeah, this is my, I'm trying to answer, the answer to the question of why people like the old, I think because there's a timelessness and a charm to them that maybe doesn't exist in a lot of the contemporary uniforms.
Well, it's like the baseball cards. Like, I mean, I collected I'm a little, just a tad younger than you, but baseball cards from the '60s. Even the ones that are like no name, like nobody's ever heard of these people, are still worth a fair amount because a lot of collectors want to collect the whole set. Versus in 1986, Topps realized, gosh, these cards are getting valuable, and they flooded the market.
Why does a vintage Corvette from the early '60s somehow look magical? Like. And then I can't tell you what a contemporary Corvette looks like. I mean, I don't care.
Yeah, well, especially if they keep changing it all the time. All right, you guys ready for our second trivia question here? All right, here we go. Who is the only player to play, talking baseball here, the only player to play for all 4 original expansion franchises and only those franchises? So this ball player didn't play for any other teams other than 4 original expansion franchises. I thought this was a very interesting question. All right. So again, which baseball player played for all 4 original expansion franchises, and he only played for those 4 franchises? I thought that was kind of interesting. All right. Stay with us. You're listening to Sports Econ 101. Don't touch that dial, because we are going to be right back. Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. One more time, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special co-hosts, Mike McDowd and Russell Jackman, and our special guest, Jerry Cohen of Ebbets Field Flannels. And by the way, Mike, I apologize to you because I looked at the email and you did give me Jerry's email. So I'm publicly saying on the air, Mike did not screw up. Edward screwed up. Nicole, so sorry. Okay. All right. Our second trivia question here, talking baseball. Who is the only baseball player to play for all 4 original expansion franchises, and he only played for those 4 teams? Crickets. Come on, guys. You ready?
Jerry?
No. Nolan Ryan.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. So he played for the Angels, which was a 1961 expansion franchise. He played for the Mets, right? They were expansion in 1962, I think. The Astros.
Yeah.
And then I guess
the Rangers, which were the Senators.
The Rangers. I didn't have that one in here, but yeah, the Rangers came from Minnesota, I think.
No, they came from Washington.
Washington. You know what's so funny? For years, I kept remembering Washington, and then Minnesota.
The original Senators went to Minnesota.
No, that's what it was. Okay.
Then they replaced them immediately. that's why that question is a little tricky, because when I was thinking of the original 4 team names. So I was thinking of the Senators, but the Senators moved to Texas, became the Rangers.
Yeah, in
71, I think 72.
71. And do you remember my favorite team, the Seattle Pilots?
Of course.
1 year. They became the San Diego Padres, didn't they?
No, they became the Milwaukee Brewers.
Okay, which the Milwaukee Brewers were like 100 years ago.
Not only that, but the Milwaukee Brewers was the minor league team from the American Association in up till 52. And then the Braves moved from Boston to Milwaukee.
Boston Braves, yeah.
And then they became the Milwaukee Braves.
Yeah.
And so the Brewers is sort of the historical name of several teams from Milwaukee. So when our good friend, guess who brought the Pilots to Milwaukee? Bud Selig.
Oh.
Yep.
Bud Selig, yeah.
He's not fondly remembered in Seattle.
Yeah, I bet. And Tom Duke, I remember him playing for Seattle. Go ahead.
So you know the story of that, right? The Pilots actually went to spring training in 70 in Phoenix as the Pilots.
Yeah.
And then they were told, and then their case was up in a bankruptcy court, and they didn't know where they'd be going. And they were, I don't know if this story is apocryphal or not, but I've heard it many times. They were driving back up from spring training, and they were told to stop in Salt Lake City and make a phone call and find out if they should turn left or right.
That's great.
And then they ended up, of course, being ordered to the bankruptcy judge ordered them to the Milwaukee ownership.
Very cool.
Wow.
And they haven't done much since, except for didn't they get in the World Series once?
I think the Brewers got in the series, didn't they? Yeah.
Well, in 1981.
Yeah, they lost.
Pavignon
twice.
To the Cardinals?
Yeah. I think it was 81.
And of course, they switched leagues. Another trivia thing.
So, yes, that's right.
Selig,
just like the Astros switched.
Selig wanted them to switch leagues because he was nostalgic for when the Braves were in Milwaukee and they were in that league.
Wow, because and Houston Astros for years were in the National League.
I still can't get to the use of the Astros being in the American League.
I know. Me too.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Bring back the New York Highlanders. Okay, go ahead.
When they played the Giants World Series recently, I think I posted something like, I won't be watching the NL West Division Championship.
Yeah.
Because for decades, both of those teams were in the NL West.
Well, yeah, they used to be a challenge to the San Francisco Giants.
That's right.
For the Astros. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, Jerry, one of the things that drew me to your company was your craftsmanship. Your like this jacket I'm wearing is the old San Francisco Seals Stadium crew jacket. I'll have to show you the back of this. I know we're on radio, but your uniforms are made with such precise craftsmanship in America. Firstly, that's awesome. I love that. I want to buy American. There's such quality that, and you can address this, but not only do simple little guys like me recognize this and other sports fans, but movie makers like the movie 42. You guys made them uniforms for that movie. Tell us about that.
That's a great story. So when they were planning 42, I think I got a call from one of the producers because there were a lot of very obscure uniforms in that movie historically. So there's one company, which I won't name, that normally gets the gig for any athletic uniforms in movies. So anytime you see a movie with basketball, baseball, whatever, there's a company, they're in LA, they're a costumer. So they usually get the gig. And that's what they do, and they do a great job. But because of our expertise, there was a lot of uniforms that they needed for scenes that took place in the Negro Leagues. And of course, Jackie was put on the Montreal Royals his first year signing with Brooklyn. And of course, that's my bread and butter. So I had to research everything down to the stripes on the socks, and I happened to be, they had a costumer for the whole film, and she was an English lady, and she knew nothing about baseball. She was a great costumer, a veteran of the industry, but she knew nothing about baseball. I happened to be in London when they called me and met up with her, and she had brought some samples and some photos, and I was able to kind of, guide her in the right direction. And she had one thing she definitely wanted to do in the movie. And if you remember, Bert Schotten in that film, the manager of the Dodgers, did not wear a uniform. He wore street clothes because he had promised his wife that he would never put on a uniform again. And when Branch Rickey asked him to be manager of the Dodgers at short notice because Leo Durocher was suspended, he honored technically the promise to his wife by not wearing a uniform. So he wore this long satin Dodger jacket over his street clothes. And she loved this image, and the costume designer, and she wanted this in the film. I happened to have a roll of this old rayon satin in my warehouse. It wasn't made anymore. So that's what got me ingratiated with the costume designer for the movie. And we ended up doing the uniforms for all the Negro Leagues and the Montreal Royals scenes, which was really, really fun.
Not only that, Jay, but you're responsible for the Turn Back the Clock series in MLB, right?
That is true. We used to go to the winter meetings every year. They'd have a little trade show associated with the winter meetings. I think the first one we went to was in Miami around 90, 91. And we sold that concept of outfit your team in historical uniforms. And it was first done in the minor leagues. And then the major leagues picked up on it. And we did quite a few. Well, you're a Bay Area guy. So we did the San Francisco Giants versus the A's. And the Giants were outfitted as the Seals and the A's as the Oakland Oaks. So that was during the time when, Mark McGuire and some of those guys were there. I think Ricky Henderson was playing for Oakland. And so we were able to outfit both clubs for that.
Very cool. Wow. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, it seems like the thing that kind of sparks me is the Brooklyn Dodgers hat. That seems to be like the one nostalgic thing that people seem to always ask for. What else? What else is like super popular?
Yeah, a lot of people have made them wrong. I don't want to name them. Yeah, it's true though. That's probably the most popular vintage hat from a sales perspective. I would say that you can't really. It's hard to say what a vintage Yankee hat is because it really didn't change very much. Superficially, but yeah, I think that Brooklyn Dodger cap is really iconic. Because of Jackie Robinson. And of course, the 50s baseball in New York, almost every single year was either the Giants or Dodgers against the Yankees.
Yeah.
From 49 to 56, with the exception, every single year, I think, was one of the New York teams. In 54, the Giants played Cleveland instead of the Yankees.
True.
But almost every year was a Subway Series. So you either had Brooklyn against the Yankees or the Giants against the Yankees. So that era, I think the other cap, the New York Giant cap with the NY, it's the same as a Mets NY. That's where the Mets got it. But the black hat with the orange button. Yeah,
that's like Christy Mathewson, the era.
Yeah, that was a lot earlier. But the Willie Mays era Giants hat, I would say.
Yeah. Hey, how expensive is it to buy these nostalgic?
It really depends. Like I said earlier, there's different levels of quality. From us, those caps were $65, $60 because again, they're made in America. It was a limited edition production. We use the real fabrication, which our competitors don't. We use the hand-stitched felt on the felt lettered hats, which our competitors just embroider. Oh. So you're looking at a really quality difference. And so, we're at the top of the food chain in terms of price. We don't apologize for it. You can get a cheaper hat lots of places, but we make the real thing on the authentic hats, and we make them still in America.
Well, not only that, but you also make like the real jackets, the old New York Giants jackets, the 49er jacket. I mean, your stuff is about as good as you're going to get.
Well, I mean, if what you want is the identical thing as close as possible to what was worn on the field, that's us. There's lots of other things out there, less money, but like you mentioned that 49er jacket, that's a wool jacket with the old logo, stitched onto the back, leather sleeves. It's just as nice. It's too bad. I always said it's a shame people can't touch things through the website, because you really can't get the whole the entire picture of the quality just by the photographs. As good as the photograph thing.
Hey, I'm loving my San Francisco Seals jacket. It's beautiful. It's hand stitched. It's felt. It's unbelievable. Hey, one other thing, Edward, I got to mention to Jerry. Jerry, you dealt with some interesting customers. One was a legendary Dodger. And talk a little about him. Anybody else, the famous athletes that you dealt with, or anybody? Oh, David Letterman. Talk about that.
Okay.
If we have time,
Jerry. Oh, we got to cut in and out. Tell you what.
Answer that before the break. Okay.
Okay.
Well, Dave got involved with us very early on when he read about us in Sports Illustrated. So he used to wear a lot of our stuff on the air. So that was great. I think, the first celebrity customer we ever had was Spike Lee. It was right after he came out with Do the Right Thing. He used to call us up and give me his orders personally. But you mentioned players. Duke Snyder used to call us up and order. He would never say who. He would never brag about who he was. We'd say, "Who's this?" He'd say, "Oh, it's Duke Snyder." We'd be like, so my partner Lisa Cooper was answering the phone one day, and she doesn't know a lot of baseball history, and so she said, "Okay, who is this?" She's taking down the order. This is before the internet, back when you had to do it on the phone. And he said his name was Duke Snyder. And she said, "Oh, did you used to play?"
Yeah, there you go. Love that. Hey, guys, let's get to our last commercial break. We always have these hard breaks here. Okay, who was the first African-American player inducted into the Hall of Fame who did not play in the Negro Leagues? All right, stay with us. Sports Econ 101. We'll be right back with some closing comments. Don't touch that dial.
Your products.
Welcome back to Sports Econ 101. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with Mike McDowd, Russell Jackman, our special guest, Jerry Cohen. Third trivia question, who was the first African-American player inducted into the Hall of Fame who had not played in the Negro Leagues? Ready? Bob Gibson, 1981.
Gibson. Wow.
Bob Gibson. Okay. Before we cut out, Jerry, how did people get a hold of you?
Well, ebbets.com, EBBETS.com. That's where all of our products are. And if you want to ever drop me a line about something historical, it's jcohen@ebbets.com. The letter J, Cohen.
All right. So before we get to our thoughts today, we got one really stupid joke. I don't know why. I decided to do a stupid joke of the week. Okay. So there was an Army survival camp, and the sergeant asked the three different privates, okay, listen, you're going to go out in the desert. It's a survival thing. You can only pick one item. What do you want? One guy says, well, I think I'd like a 5-gallon jug of water. He goes, okay, that's pretty smart. Next guy, again, they're going out in the desert. They ask the second guy, he goes, well, I think I'd like one of those long white sort of, sheet type things because the sun will be, too hot. He goes, that's pretty smart too. And he asks the third guy, he goes, what do you want? He goes, I want a Chevy car door. He goes, why? He says, well, when it gets hot, I can roll the window down. Okay, I figured one really stupid joke. Okay, you ready? Here's our thoughts for the day. If you're lonely, dim the lights and put on a horror movie. After a while, it won't feel like you're alone anymore. Right? And they say 40 is the new 30 and 50 is the new 40. But all I know is the older I get, the more 9 p.m. is the new midnight. All right. Jerry Cohen of Ebbets Field Flannels. Thank you so much for joining us. It was very entertaining. Really enjoyed your expertise on
Thanks,
the old,
guys. Appreciate it.
All right. And audience, tune in next week to Sports Econ 101. I'm not sure if we're going to have a stupid joke of the week, but we'll definitely have our thoughts for the day, where we're going to be discussing sports topics from a business perspective and asking more sports trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm your host, Edward Brown. We'll see you next week.
Happy 4th of July.
Happy 4th of July.
Yeah. So long.
Hope that was good.